No nurse lasted a week with the ruthless mafia boss, until the poor nurse broke the rules. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the wind whispered through the twisted trees, carrying rumors of the lord who ruled the dark fortress ahead. Villagers had warned her. No nurse stays there for more than a week, they said. He will break your spirit. But Alara had never been one to listen to fear. She was a healer, a simple nurse with gentle hands and a heart that refused to turn away from suffering. She had seen enough sickness, enough pain, to know that sometimes the bravest thing one could do was to go where others would not. And so, despite the tales of terror and cruelty, she pressed forward, her resolve as strong as the staff she carried. The castle rose before her, black as storm clouds, its spires twisting toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The moat surrounding it shimmered with a strange, dark light, and the drawbridge creaked under her tentative steps. As she crossed, a chill ran down her spine, not from the cold but from the sense of being watched. Inside, the castle was quieter than she had imagined. No laughter, no servants bustling about, only the echo of her footsteps and the faint scent of incense and old stone. She was led through a long corridor, tapestries fluttering slightly despite the still air. The tapestries depicted battles, kings, queens, and warriors, all frozen in moments of triumph and despair. But it was the throne room that held her attention, vast and shadowed, with walls lined by tall, arched windows. He sat on a throne carved from black stone, the air around him heavy with power and something darker, something that made her stomach twist with both fear and curiosity. His hair was as dark as the night outside, and his eyes were sharp, like two obsidian shards cutting through the dim light. There was a stillness to him, as if the world itself paused in his presence. "Are you the nurse?" His voice was low and measured, each word deliberate. There was no warmth in it, yet it carried a command she could not ignore. "I am," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "My name is Alara. I have come to care for you, my lord." He studied her for a long moment, eyes like a storm, searching her, testing her. "They say no nurse lasts a week here. Why should I believe you will?" Alara swallowed. "Because I do not know fear the way others do. I only know care." He leaned back, a shadow crossing his face, and she realized she had spoken more boldly than intended. Yet something flickered in his gaze, curiosity or perhaps recognition. "Care," he repeated. "Care does not survive here." Alara felt her chest tighten, but she did not waver. Maybe that is because no one has tried enough. Maybe care is stronger than fear, even in the darkest places. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sound of the wind against the stone walls. Then slowly he waved a hand. "Come closer. Let us see if your hands are as bold as your words." She stepped forward, her heart thundering, and found herself in the presence of a man whose aura seemed almost alive. There was a visible tension in him, a power barely restrained, like a storm waiting to break. She had heard of lords who ruled with cruelty, but there was more to him than that, something tragic, something lonely. He allowed her to examine him, though every motion she made was met with a sharp glance, a subtle test of her courage. His body bore scars, both old and new, and the pale skin around them seemed almost unnatural, as if the magic of his lineage had left its mark. "You see," he said finally, his voice softening slightly, "most flee when they see these marks. They see weakness and they run." "I do not see weakness," she said softly. "I see someone who has endured too much and deserves help." The corners of his lips twitched, almost like a smile, though it never reached his eyes. "Few ever speak so boldly to me." Alara felt her own pulse quicken. There was danger here, yes, but also a deep loneliness, a longing she could sense but not name. She could feel the layers of pain he had built around himself, each one a barrier to the world. And yet she felt drawn to him, compelled to pierce that barrier with something as simple and yet as dangerous as kindness. "Very well," he said after a long pause. "You may stay, but know this: nothing here is as it seems." This castle, these walls, even my life is bound by forces that care little for mercy. One wrong step and you may not leave." Alara nodded. "I understand, and yet I am here." The days that followed were a test of endurance, patience, and subtle courage. She learned his routines, the quiet rhythms of a man who ruled his castle with precision and shadowed intent. He rarely spoke, except to issue commands or to test her resolve, but when he did, she noticed the cracks in his composure, moments when the storm behind his eyes softened. Alara's presence began to affect him in ways he could not admit. He noticed the gentle way she arranged his room, the small acts of kindness that no one else had dared to offer. He found himself watching her, not out of desire but out of a strange, unfamiliar need, a need for something he had long denied himself: trust. And yet he fought it. Every glance, every gesture of warmth from her was met with a wall of restraint. He had ruled this land for decades, commanding fear and respect, and yet here was a simple healer challenging everything he had built around himself. One evening, as the storm outside battered the castle walls, he called her to his chambers. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced across his sharp features. "Why do you persist?" he asked, his voice low, almost curious. "No one has dared, no one has lasted." Alara met his gaze without fear. "Because I see you," she said simply. "Not the Lord or the curse, not the power or the fear, I see the man beneath, and I believe he deserves to be seen." He looked away, the tension in his shoulders betraying a vulnerability he rarely showed. "You do not understand. To care for me is dangerous. My life, my curse, it will touch you and you cannot escape." "I am not here to escape," she said softly. "I am here to help. That is my purpose and I will not turn away." For a long moment, silence hung between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant roar of thunder. Then slowly, he rose and stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in its intensity. He was a man accustomed to command, to control, yet now he seemed almost unsure, a flicker of humanity breaking through the armor of fear. "You speak as if the world outside these walls does not matter," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. "Yet it will not forgive you for caring." "I do not seek forgiveness," she replied. "Only the chance to heal, even if only a part of what has been broken." His eyes softened for just a heartbeat, and in that instant Alara knew she had crossed a line that no one else had dared. She had seen the man beneath the legend, and he had noticed her courage, her unwillingness to flee. The night stretched on, the storm outside echoing the storm within him. And as she left the chamber, he remained seated, staring into the fire, lost in thought. For the first time in years, he considered that perhaps a healer could do more than mend wounds. Perhaps she could reach into the darkness of his soul and touch something long forgotten: hope. But he was a man of power, bound by curses and fear, and he knew that such hope came with danger. To care for her, to allow himself to feel even the smallest spark of trust, was to risk everything he had built. And yet, he could not turn away. As dawn broke over the black spires of the castle, Alara prepared for another day, unaware that she had already begun to change the lord of the castle in ways no one had dared to dream. And somewhere deep within the shadows, he watched her, a storm of longing and fear colliding, knowing that the rules of his life were already beginning to shift, and that perhaps, for the first time, he feared not the world outside, but the loss of the one who dared to see him for who he truly was. Cliffhanger. Late that night, as Alara rested in the small room assigned to her, a quiet knock came at her door. A folded note, sealed with black wax, waited on the floor. She opened it and read the single line in a hand both elegant and commanding. "Do not think your kindness is unnoticed. Tomorrow the true test begins." Her heart raced. The game had begun, and she could feel that nothing, not even fear, would prepare her for what lay ahead. The first light of dawn slipped through the tall windows of the castle, brushing against the cold stone floors. Alara woke to the soft hum of the castle, a sound both lonely and alive. Her hands itched to begin her work, but today was different. The note she had found the night before lingered in her mind. Tomorrow, the true test begins. She did not know what it meant, yet a strange excitement fluttered in her chest. She had entered the castle with the courage of a healer, but now she realized that courage alone would not suffice. This was a place where fear and power coiled tightly around each other, and where trust was a luxury few could afford. Alara made her way to the Lord's chambers, the corridors feeling longer, darker than yesterday. The tapestries that had seemed static before now seemed almost alive, the warriors frozen in battle staring at her with hollow eyes. She felt the weight of the castle's history pressing down, yet she walked steadily, determined to meet whatever challenge awaited her. Malric was already awake, seated by the fire. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, followed her as she entered. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, a silent measurement of courage and resolve. "Good morning," Alara said softly, her voice carrying through the room like a gentle wind. He did not reply immediately. Instead, he gestured for her to come closer, and she obeyed, feeling the invisible pull of his presence. There was a stillness about him that both frightened and fascinated her. "Your first task," he said finally, "is not of the body but of the mind. You will learn the rules of this place or you will not survive." Alara nodded. She had expected tests of skill, perhaps of endurance, but this was something different. It was a test of patience, understanding, and courage. For the next hours she observed him, noting every movement, every shift in his expression. He ruled his domain silently, commanding servants with a mere look, yet there was a loneliness in his power, a restraint that spoke of battles fought long ago and victories that had cost more than they were worth. As she worked to heal minor injuries and care for his health, she noticed small contradictions in him. His hand would tremble slightly as he adjusted his cloak, his eyes flickering toward the window as if expecting something impossible to arrive. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words were sharp, careful, and full of hidden meaning. And then there were the moments when he was unguarded, brief flashes of vulnerability. A sigh that escaped him as he examined the fire, a pause in his gaze when he thought no one was watching, a faint shadow of longing in his eyes. In those moments, Alara felt a strange kinship with him, as if she could see beyond the mask he wore for the world. "You do not fear me," he said one afternoon, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for hours. "I am a healer," Alara replied simply. "Fear has no place in my work, only care, only understanding." He studied her for a long moment, and she felt the intensity of his gaze like a weight pressing down on her chest. "Care," he said slowly, as if tasting the word for the first time, "is a dangerous thing here. It can be as sharp as any blade." "I know," she said, meeting his eyes without flinching, "but I have chosen this path. I will not turn away, even if the world tells me to." For a moment he said nothing, and the room was filled with the sound of the fire crackling and the distant echo of the castle itself. Then he stood, moving closer, and Alara could feel the heat of his presence, the strength that radiated from him like a living thing. "You are bold," he said, "bold and perhaps foolish, but there is something in your courage, is something that I have not seen in a long time." Alara's heart quickened. She did not fully understand what she had done to earn this rare acknowledgement, but she sensed the delicate thread of connection beginning to weave between them. Days passed in a rhythm of careful observation, quiet conversations, and small acts of bravery. Alara began to understand the complexity of the man before her. Malric was not simply cruel or ruthless. He was a man shaped by loss, by betrayal, and by the heavy weight of a curse that had haunted his family for generations. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep, molten orange, Alara found him standing by the window, looking out at the world beyond the castle walls. "Do you ever wonder what life is like outside these walls?" she asked softly, approaching him. He did not turn to answer immediately. Instead, he remained silent, gazing at the horizon as if trying to remember a time before the darkness had claimed him. "I wonder every day," he admitted at last, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But it is not a life I can touch." "Not anymore." Alara placed a hand gently on his arm. "Perhaps it is not too late," she said. "Perhaps even in darkness we can find light if we dare to reach for it." He flinched at her touch, but only slightly. There was a tension in him, a struggle between instinct and desire, between fear and trust. And yet, for the first time, he allowed himself to feel something beyond the walls he had built. "You are different from the others," he said, finally meeting her gaze. "They would have fled or whispered behind my back. You face me directly, without fear, without expectation. It is unsettling and yet welcome." Alara smiled faintly. "I do not seek reward, I only seek to help. Perhaps in helping you I will help myself as well." The days turned into weeks, and slowly a fragile bond began to grow between them. It was not love, not yet, but it was trust, a rare, delicate trust that both frightened and exhilarated them. Malric found himself sharing small details of his life, memories long buried, stories of battles, of lost friends, of nights spent alone in the dark. And Alara listened, offering her presence as a balm, a steadying force in the storm of his existence. Yet the castle was not without danger. Rumors of rival factions and treacherous nobles seeking to exploit Malric's curse reached the walls. Shadows moved in the corridors, and strange noises echoed at night, reminding Alara that the world outside was as cruel as the darkness within. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Alara was tending to a minor wound on Malric's arm when the fire flickered, casting dancing shadows across the room. "You are persistent," he said, his voice tight with restrained emotion. "Even in the face of danger, you remain. Why?" "Because it is the right thing to do," she replied simply. "Because I cannot turn away when someone needs help." He looked at her, eyes searching, as if trying to measure the depth of her resolve. "And if I were to lose control, if the curse takes over?" "Then I will stay," she said firmly. "Even in the darkness, I will not abandon you." For the first time, he allowed himself a smile, brief and fleeting, but genuine. Few would have the courage to say that, fewer still would mean it. That night, as Alara returned to her room, she felt the weight of the castle's history pressing down on her. The walls were thick with magic and memories, with secrets and shadows. Yet she also felt the spark of something new, something fragile but real, a connection with a man who had been untouchable, a man who was beginning to see the world differently because of her presence. And somewhere in the silence, Malric watched her go, the storm outside echoing the storm within him. He realized that the walls he had built, the masks he had worn, were beginning to crumble. The nurse who had dared to see him, to speak to him with care and courage, was changing everything he had known. Cliffhanger. That night, a distant knock echoed through the castle halls. Alara opened her door to find a small, black box with intricate carvings and a note in the same elegant hand as before. "Tomorrow, you will see why no one lasts. Be ready to choose your heart or your safety." Her pulse quickened. The test was coming. And for the first time, she wondered if her courage would be enough to face what lay ahead, and what it might awaken in the man she had begun to see as more than a lord, more than a legend, but as someone human, vulnerable and achingly alive. The morning air was sharp and heavy, with the scent of rain, as Alara prepared for the day. The note from the night before had left her restless, the words echoing in her mind. "Tomorrow, you will see why no one lasts. Be ready to choose your heart or your safety." She could not ignore it. Something was coming. She could feel it in the hush of the castle, in the tension that seemed to cling to the walls. Yet, as always, she did not let fear guide her steps. Courage had carried her this far, and she knew it would carry her further, even into danger. Malric was waiting in the throne room when she arrived, his posture rigid, his eyes shadowed with unease. The storm outside rattled the windows, lightning casting sharp streaks across his dark features. "You are here," he said, his voice controlled but tense. "Good. You must know the test is not simple. Many have tried to survive this place and many have failed." "I am not afraid," she replied. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, steady and calm. "I came to heal, to help, and to face whatever comes." He studied her, the faintest flicker of surprise crossing his eyes. "You are unlike the others," he said, almost to himself. "They would have run. They would have begged for mercy or whispered in fear. You meet it with resolve. That is dangerous and yet welcome." Alara felt a strange warmth at his words. It was not praise exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition of her courage, which in this place was as rare as sunlight in a storm. The day unfolded as Malric had promised. Shadows moved along the corridors. Whispers of unseen threats and secret dangers reached them, and the castle itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. Alara realized that the test was not simply about her strength or her skills as a healer. It was about her courage, her resilience, and the choices she would make when the world demanded more than she thought she could give. At noon, a messenger arrived, a man clad in dark, silken garments, his eyes wary and alert. He bowed low, delivering a scroll sealed with a symbol Alara had never seen before. Malric took it from him without a word, breaking the seal, and read in silence. "The council has sent a challenge," he said at last, his voice low, dangerous. "They do not want me alive. They will come here to this castle and they will try to take what is mine." Alara's heart skipped. "What can I do?" she asked, though the answer was clear. She could not flee, could not hide. She would stand by him as she always had. "Do not speak yet," he said sharply, though not unkindly. "This is not a battle you can fight with mere courage alone." The rest of the afternoon passed in preparation. Alara helped tend to wounds, gathered supplies, and learned the hidden passages of the castle, secret doors and corridors, places where shadows could hide both friend and foe. She could see how much Malric had relied on fear as his shield, and how unaccustomed he was to having someone act not in fear, but in trust. As the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky a dark crimson, Malric summoned her to the highest tower of the castle. The wind howled around them, lifting her hair, tugging at the folds of her cloak. From this height the kingdom stretched in every direction, a patchwork of forests, rivers, and distant villages. "You must understand," he said, his voice almost lost in the wind, "that those who come are not mere enemies. They are cunning, patient, and willing to destroy everything to achieve their goals. If you remain here with me, you risk everything, and yet—" He did not finish, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The wind whistled through the battlements, carrying the weight of danger and anticipation. Alara stepped closer. "And yet what?" she asked softly. "Yet I cannot let you go," he said finally, the words almost a whisper. "Not now, not when something in me begins to feel alive again." The admission startled her. She had begun to sense his feelings, the subtle warmth that lingered beneath his darkness, but to hear him speak it aloud made her chest tighten with both hope and fear. "I am not here to leave," she said firmly, "and I do not ask you to trust me blindly. But I will stand beside you no matter what comes." He nodded slowly, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to calm, the lightning replaced by the quiet pulse of shared understanding. Night fell, and with it came the first of the intruders. Figures moved in the shadows, skilled and silent, testing the defenses of the castle. Alara and Malric worked together in tense, fluid coordination. He gave orders, precise and unyielding, while she tended the minor wounds, guided the servants, and moved with a courage that surprised even him. The first clash was sudden and fierce. A figure slipped through the outer corridor, dagger in hand, and Malric met it with swift precision. Alara watched, breath caught in her chest, as he moved like a storm, unleashed, strong, lethal, yet careful enough to prevent unnecessary harm. She realized then that the man she had seen as cruel was also capable of restraint, of mercy, even in the midst of danger. They fought side by side, their movements synchronized, each trusting the other instinctively. She could feel his presence like a shield, a living force of power and protection, and in return, he seemed to rely on her in ways that went beyond mere necessity. There was an unspoken connection forming, a bond forged in danger, trust, and the quiet, steady courage of one who refuses to abandon another. When the intruders retreated, defeated but not destroyed, the castle lay in tense silence. Malric and Alara stood together in the hall, their breaths heavy, hearts racing from the adrenaline of combat. "You did well," he said finally, his voice low, almost reluctant in its praise. "Fewer than 10 would have stood as you did. Fewer still would have faced them without fear." Alara felt a faint flush at his words. "I did what I had to do," she said simply, "and I was not alone." He studied her, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes, revealing a depth of emotion he rarely allowed to surface. "No," he said slowly, "you were not, and that makes all the difference." For a long while they remained in silence, the echoes of the night lingering in the shadows. And then in the quiet, Alara dared to speak of what she had seen in him, beneath the layers of power, fear, and solitude. "You are not as alone as you think," she said softly. "You have strength, yes, but you also have the capacity for trust, for connection. That is why I am here, not to change you, but to remind you that even the strongest walls can open to light." Malric's gaze softened, though only briefly. "You speak of light as if it could touch a man like me." "Perhaps it can," she replied, "if he allows it." The storm outside had subsided, leaving the castle bathed in pale moonlight. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the silence felt almost sacred. In that stillness, a quiet understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared courage, mutual respect, and the fragile beginnings of trust that could grow into something far deeper. Yet danger was not gone. Alara knew it, and Malric knew it. The intruders would return, stronger and more cunning, and the true test of courage, loyalty, and the bond forming between them had only just begun. That night, as she lay in her small room, Alara reflected on the events of the day. She had faced danger, witnessed the depths of Malric's power, and glimpsed the humanity beneath his fearsome exterior. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something more than duty, a fragile, tentative spark of connection that promised warmth even in the darkness. And somewhere deep within the castle, Malric stood by the window, gazing at the horizon. He had always ruled through fear and power, yet he felt a strange, unfamiliar stir within him. The nurse who had dared to see him, who had faced the dangers of the castle and the world outside with courage and compassion, was changing him. He could feel it in the way his chest tightened at her presence, in the way his thoughts lingered on her long after she had left his sight. Cliffhanger. As the moon reached its peak, a shadow appeared on the battlements, a figure cloaked in black, watching, waiting, and moving with the silent precision of a predator. Alara's name was whispered on the wind, carried by a voice both haunting and familiar. "Your choice is coming, and it will decide more than you know." The castle trembled with the promise of trials yet to come. And for the first time, both healer and lord understood that courage alone might not be enough to face the darkness that approached, and that the bond between them would be tested in ways neither had ever imagined. The castle walls shivered under the first cold wind of the season, and the gray dawn stretched across the horizon like a promise and a warning at the same time. Alara stood at her window, her eyes tracing the dark spires that loomed over the town below. The events of the previous nights lingered in her mind, the attacks, the tests, the invisible threads of danger that seemed to reach into every corner of the fortress. She felt the tension in the castle like a living thing. Every hallway, every corridor, every shadow seemed to watch and wait. And yet, she did not feel fear. She felt determination, a steady resolve that had grown with every trial, every brush with danger, and every moment spent with Malric. He appeared behind her without a sound, his presence commanding yet oddly gentle. Alara could feel the warmth of his gaze before he even spoke. "You are awake," he said, his voice low, careful, carrying that strange weight of power that never failed to make her heart quicken. "I could not sleep," she replied simply. "There is much to prepare for." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across the floor, and for a moment he seemed almost human, less the lord, more the man she had glimpsed beneath the fearsome exterior. "They will come today," he said. "The council will not rest. They believe that by destroying me, they can claim my lands, my power, and my name, but they do not understand what they face." Alara nodded, her hands tightening around the small bag of herbs she always carried. "Then we must face them together. Whatever comes, I will not turn away." For the first time, Malric allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You truly are unlike anyone I have known." The day unfolded with a tense rhythm. Servants moved quietly through the halls, securing doors and windows, while Malric prepared for the confrontation with precision and calm that belied the storm building outside. Alara assisted where she could, tending to minor injuries, arranging supplies, and learning to move with a caution and confidence that surprised even herself. By midday, the first signs of their enemies arrived. Figures moved along the perimeter of the castle, shadows at first, then men and women cloaked in the colors of the council, their intentions clear. Malric met them with a quiet authority that made their hesitation visible even from afar. He was not a man to be challenged lightly, and Alara could see the fear ripple through the approaching figures as they took measure of him. "You have done well," he said softly, his hand brushing against hers for the briefest of moments. "You are more capable than I could have imagined." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, yet there was no time to dwell on it. The castle trembled as the first wave of attackers reached the gates, and Malric moved like a shadow through the halls, his presence both commanding and protective. Alara followed, her heart steady, her hands ready to act, her mind focused. The battle was both fierce and silent. Arrows whispered through the air, footsteps echoed against stone, and shadows moved like living things. Malric fought with skill and precision, but it was not brute force alone that guided him. It was strategy, patience, and a deep understanding of the castle he ruled. Alara moved alongside him, her presence a balm in the chaos, tending wounds and guiding the defenders with courage and calm that seemed almost unnatural in the heat of danger. At one point, a figure slipped past their defenses, a shadowy intruder moving toward the inner chambers. Malric intercepted with swift precision, yet even he struggled against the cunning of their foes. It was then that Alara realized the true depth of the danger they faced. It was not only strength and skill, but cunning and strategy that threatened them. "You must trust me," Malric said, his voice low but urgent. "Do not step back." "I trust you," she replied, her voice steady, "and I will not falter." Together they faced the intruder, a tense dance of strength and strategy, courage and precision. Alara's heart pounded, yet she felt no fear, only the quiet certainty that she was where she belonged, standing beside a man whose strength was matched only by the depth of his vulnerability. When the intruder finally fell back, defeated but not destroyed, a moment of stillness followed. The castle lay quiet, save for the distant echoes of retreating footsteps and the whisper of the wind against stone. Malric and Alara stood together, breathing heavily, their eyes meeting in a shared understanding that transcended words. "You are remarkable," he said finally, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. "I did not think it possible for anyone to withstand what you have endured, and yet you have." Alara smiled faintly, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. "I did not endure it alone," she said softly. "We faced it together." He nodded, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. "Together," he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. The remainder of the day passed in cautious vigilance. The council's forces had been repelled, but the threat remained, and both Malric and Alara knew that victory was only temporary. Yet in the quiet moments between preparation and defense, a fragile bond grew stronger, a bond built not on fear or obligation, but on trust, courage, and the subtle understanding of shared danger and emotion. As night fell, the castle seemed to breathe again, the shadows softening, the walls no longer oppressive but protective. Alara found herself in the small garden near the castle's inner courtyard, the moonlight painting silver patterns across the stones. She breathed deeply, the scent of rain and herbs calming her, and felt the first true sense of peace she had experienced since arriving. Malric appeared silently, standing beside her. He did not speak immediately, simply watching the moonlight reflect in her eyes. Then he spoke low and earnest. "You have changed this place," he said softly, "not by power or skill, but by presence, by courage, by care." Alara turned to him, her expression gentle but firm. "It was never about changing the place," she said. "It was about standing where I am needed. And I am needed here by you, by this castle, by the people who look to you, whether they admit it or not." He studied her for a long moment, and then, finally, he allowed a genuine smile to touch his features. "I do not know how to repay you for what you have done, for what you have given. Perhaps there is no repayment possible. Perhaps not," she said softly. "Perhaps it is enough that we faced it together." The night stretched on, and for the first time the castle felt alive with quiet hope rather than fear. Shadows still lingered and dangers would always remain, but for the first time, Malric allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the walls, a future not defined by curses, power, or fear, but by trust, courage, and the fragile strength of connection. In the early hours of the morning, as the first hints of sunlight touched the horizon, a quiet understanding passed between them, one that needed no words. They had faced danger together, survived the trials, and discovered something far more powerful than fear or power: the courage to trust, the willingness to care, and the spark of hope that even the darkest night could be pierced by light. Alara watched the sun rise over the black spires of the castle, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Not only for the safety of the castle or its lord, but for the bond that had grown between them, a bond that promised transformation, redemption, and the possibility of a future built on trust and shared courage. Malric stood beside her, silent and steady, no longer the untouchable lord or the feared ruler of shadowed halls, but a man reborn through courage, care, and connection. He placed a hand lightly on hers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey and the strength they had found in each other. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world washed in silver light, and in that quiet dawn, the promise of tomorrow felt real, bright, and endless. Cliffhanger resolution. As the two of them stood together, the wind carrying the scent of rain and hope, a small, folded note appeared at the edge of the garden, sealed with the same black wax. Malric opened it, reading silently, and then looked at Alara. "The trials are over, but the world still watches. Choose wisely, for the path forward is yours to walk together." Alara smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "Then we walk it together," she said, her voice steady and full of quiet certainty. Malric nodded, and together they stepped forward into the dawn, ready to face whatever the world might bring, not as lord and nurse, not as fearful and cautious, but as two hearts united by courage, care, and the quiet, enduring power of trust.